In the beginning, there was jelly, and then there was peanut butter, and they came together to form something far, far greater. So Tom, my question to you is the same for Half-Life and VR. Is Half-Life Alyx something that takes a 2 and makes it even better?
It is.
OMG. Alright, so everyone, we are here to talk about Half-Life Alyx. We got the game in a few days ago, and Tom fully beat it. Unfortunately, with how tight the review embargo is, we didn't have time to do a full review, so instead we're here to offer our review thoughts in a more casual discussion form. So Tom, my question to you is, what makes Half-Life Alyx so good? Because when we were talking about this game up through the review, you sounded like you were being blown away by this game almost every time I talked to you. So what's your overall thoughts on it? Like, how good is this game?
It's just a real package, the perfect fusion of Half-Life and VR, like together in a big, huge AAA budget game that, is a full-length game. It's not like a short episodic Half-Life game. It took me about 16 hours to beat it. I'm guessing maybe if I wasn't stuck a couple times, I could shave it down to 13 hours, but still, I was at the halfway point, and I was left thinking, wow, Valve, great job. You've done good. And then it picked up and became something truly special after it. So, and like the second half.
That is kind of amazing. That's pretty impressive. Yeah, one of the big problems with VR is just how short a lot of the experiences are, or shallow they can be, or how kind of maybe gimmicky they feel. I'm not taking away anything from them, but there has been kind of like a lack of these big AAA full-length adventures, let alone starring, one of the biggest series out there, one of the biggest IPs out there being Half-Life. So it sounds like Valve kind of nailed it in this case, right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's a full Half-Life universe. It felt like Half-Life. When you add in elements like the medkits making that sound and crates with the Half-Life branding, I mean, it feels one and the same even with differences from other Half-Life games. Like, it feels like a great evolution and continuation of the series.
And that's kind of a great lead into my question about the gravity gloves and, finding out how those work, because that really is an evolution of Half-Life 2. It just took that same basic idea and put it in glove form, right? That way you're using your actual hands at your actual hand motion to kind of like grab and control things in the environment, right? So how cool were those, or how well did they work? Like, were those the main feature of the game? Tell me more about them.
They are up there. It's pretty similar to how big of a part the gravity gun was in Half-Life 2. And, personally, I like to kind of think of them as the gravity gloves. But, it only took me about 3 times to flick my hand back and to catch an item. When you kind of aim with a fist, target, kind of press button, flick back, and keep your hand open to catch and grab it. I was using the Knuckles controllers. It might be slightly different than other things, but they were super intuitive and easy to use, and it made rummaging through the world for items and ammo and pickups sort of its own sort of fun part of the game itself.
Yeah, because it looks like, going from the videos I've seen, you have like a crazy amount of control in this environment. Like, it takes the physics of Half-Life 2 and merges it with what we've kind of come to expect of virtual reality, where you're able to like interact with a lot of things. Like, it kind of reminded me of, this is gonna sound insane, but taking the interactive elements of a job simulator and building a Half-Life game around it. So is it fun just to interact with things in the game? Because I remember in Half-Life 2, it was fun just to pick up things with the gravity gun, chuck them around, and see what happened. That's part of what I think made Ravenholm so memorable, is like picking up those saw blades, just shooting them through enemies, right? Is that partially what makes this game so enjoyable?
Part of it definitely is being able to interact with the environment in so many different ways. It's not quite there where you can fling items at enemies, you more stagger them, unless maybe it's some other creative solution in there that I missed. But being able to pick up items, move them around, rip wood off doorways that's blocking you, like sort of pick things up, swing them, picking up a grenade and lobbing it at enemies different ways, it just makes the gameplay options so much more varied in the experience while it's happening, as opposed to maybe a preset animation that you're going through.
Are there any parts of the nature of having to use your hands in the environment that surprised you, or like impressed you with how like clever it was? Like, they asked something of you that they wouldn't normally expect, because you're thinking about playing a game and was basically still a whole new way for most people. So is there anything that caught you off guard?
One thing that was impressive was, when you're kind of stretching out your hands and you kind of push them outwards with all the fingers intertwined, I could kind of recreate that in Half-Life Alyx. So even though it had nothing to the game, I could do that.
Nice. Pretty impressive.
I know we're talking about the hands, but one element of a VR game, as I was playing in room scale, kind of in a small room, is that I could sidestep a barnacle enemy. I was kind of stuck in it trying to teleport by, and then I realized, wait, what if I walked sideways around it? And that was a solution there that worked for me. That was one of those aha moments I really liked.
How did being in VR like kind of add to the combat in general, or the more action-focused parts of the game? Because presumably you can like duck to take cover behind objects, right? You can maybe peek through, I'm guessing, like gaps in the scenery. What did that add? Did it make it feel way more intense than it did in previous games?
It is more intense. All the enemies in VR seem bigger.
Right.
They're right there in person, so being able to peek around a corner or maybe in a gap that normally might be a collision hitbox, and being able to shoot through that small, maybe 6-inch gap at an enemy, it really adds a lot to the game. And as these enemies are coming at it, it's kind of like a feeling of crouching and cowering at them as I'm hiding from them, reloading, fumbling my shells, trying to get it right. Even at the simpler enemies like head crab zombies later on. Being there, trying to dodge, let's say there's one sort of drone enemy that comes at you with a saw blade, trying to actually physically dodge it as it lurches at you.
Oh man.
I physically dodged there for the discussion. I don't know why I do that, but it's like moving our hands. and or a head crab jumping at you, it's like, whoa, and then trying to, if it actually gets on me, going like, and flailing to try to get it off, and stuff like that.
How terrifying is that? Is that freaky? Do they latch onto your face?
They kind of look like they're latching down a bit lower, so it's not super up close and personal. Like, I think they held back a bit to make it less disgusting, to be honest. They could have done.
Yeah, I can only imagine that would be incredibly freaky, because Raven Home like freaked me out throughout the entire duration. And I think you mentioned to me there was one point where you ducked, or like you were frightened and you ran into a wall in real life.
Yeah, there's one chapter in particular, like I thought personally I was doing a better job at keeping in the room scale boundaries that appear from time to time. As you know from a demo at GDC, I managed to do Jurassic Park-like closeness to being towards people and not knowing it. But in this one, there was an enemy that didn't have jump scares, but it was so frightening that, I just, the room scale boundaries didn't matter. I leaped and went to the wall.
Oh man. Now there's something else you touched on earlier too that's kind of related, and you mentioned how like you had to reload at some point, and that's something you actually have to do manually in this game, right? Like you actually have to manually manipulate the weapons in order to reload them as if they were like real physical objects. So I just want to find a little bit more about that. Like, did that add to the experience, and was that kind of like tough to do when you're freaking out against these enemies that are coming at you that are larger than life?
I found it added to it. It added more strategy to it because I had to think about how much ammo I had. Should I be ready for reloading? I kind of learned the hard way a few times, but learning about it, basically you press a button, the clip comes out in your pistol, you reach over your shoulder into your backpack, and you grab a clip, because normally you store items back there, put it back in, and then you have to pull the hammer back, or at least what I think is a hammer. I'm sorry, I don't know much about guns.
Nor I.
And then you're ready to go again. Now, easy in practice, but this is something normally done for me with a button press. You might think, well, why is reloading at in the game? It didn't have to be, but it adds to the pace of the game. I would point out, like Resident Evil 4, you can't really run around and shoot. I mean, people say, why not? Well, it adds to the game in a fashion like that.
That's really cool. Yeah, basically kind of turning the act of reloading into a bit of a mechanic. A little bit, well, not that similar. I was going to mention Gears of War. Kind of did something similar, but in a very different way. So
yeah, that was a mini game.
Exactly,
almost.
Yeah, bingo. Real quick, since we've been talking about combat a little bit, like how much space did you actually need to play this game? How much space were you working with, and did you find it to be adequate? Do you wish you had more, or was it just enough?
I was working in about a 7 by 7 foot space, and sometimes I wished I had more. It was something I kind of grew accustomed to what my limits were as I went on the game. I used shift teleports, you kind of point and click to your position. Sometimes I would have to kind of point and click, so I would have enough room to walk a little ways if I wanted to. But for the most part, like let's say 90% of the time, I felt it was perfectly fine.
Right, because the game seems pretty accommodating of different play styles, both with respect to how much physical space you have, but also just how you deal with VR games in general, because I believe they offer, I think 3 different movement options, right?
Yeah, well, there's kind of 2 different teleport options. The other more VR friendly one is just blink teleport, where you're instantly teleported to position. And there's continuous, where you hold down on the joystick to move around. So it's more like a traditional game, but moving around, which is harder to get used to in VR.
Right.
I could play for about an hour without any problems, really, but I did feel a bit like I was on a boat afterwards, so I didn't want to push my luck to try to power through the whole game and be able to talk about it now.
Now, with continuous, you can play sitting down at least, though, right? Or I'd imagine
more
maybe
than
not.
likely, because you can sit down. That'd be a way to get used to it too and get your VR legs under you.
One thing we haven't touched on really much is the story and the characters. One of the things Half-Life is well known for is kind of its story, especially with how it's told it, almost exclusively always via just the first-person perspective. Like, there weren't any cutscenes. Like, the story happens around you. You are part of it. You are an active participant in the story. Is that the case for Half-Life Alyx? And how did that end up feeling to you?
That is the case for Half-Life Alyx. The weird part is that you are no longer a silent protagonist. You're actually a character that talks back to other characters.
Yeah, it'd be weird if Alyx didn't talk in this game.
Yeah, it's like she was mute until the events of Half-Life 2, thanks to an alien force.
Because, yeah, this is a prequel, right? Just to clarify.
Yeah, this is a prequel. You get to see City 17 being built. I know in VR, thanks to hearing the developer talks, that it's extremely hard to get people actually looking at what you want them to.
Right.
You can have a giant blinking billboard with sirens and people turn around and look at a small dandelion. I guess Valve's experience over the years had made them really good at this, and they probably had tons of iteration to nail it right, because I found myself always finding the right story moments. I found myself seeing the right areas, environments, and going to the right places without getting lost.
All right. And is the story itself compelling? Like, did you find it added meaningfully to the Half-Life universe? Did it kind of like fill in some details that perhaps were missing from past games? Or did it tell more its own story in a compelling way?
I was kind of surprised going into a prequel, because I would think it's more self-contained, maybe like a side story. But in this one, they managed to surprise me and make it in a meaningful way to the Half-Life universe. There's a lot of foreshadowing go on to the events of Half-Life 2, like let's say coming across a photo of Dog being like a little baby dog version.
That's adorable.
And stuff like that really kind of solidify the Half-Life universe. Back to the characters though, you do also get to talk to a character called Russell who's helping you out. He's just on a headset talking to you. At first I thought, is this another Wheatley type character from Portal 2? But no, he's his own unique guy. He's pretty funny, and he's nice to be there in the moment, especially like using a flashlight going through a dark tunnel.
So we kind of touched on it a little bit there, like you mentioned City 17. How does that feel, like being in City 17? Because I remember playing through Half-Life 2, and the whole sequence involving City 17 is so well done, and it just feels very oppressive and frightening, really, like interacting with these guards that keep making sure you stay in the limited area you're allowed. What's that feel like in VR? Like, did it feel like City 17, and was it kind of weird being there? Like, did it feel like you were there even?
I would say it definitely did feel like I was there, and I think Valve has really leveled up their sort of design and environment abilities since Half-Life 2, maybe even since Portal 2, and what they're capable of doing, it feels like. I would say they do a fantastic job of making the city feel alive. I mean, you got the old European style, and you come across, the plaster and like torn, worn out drywall, on top of the Combine ripping through walls with giant cables and bricks scattered around, just like destroying it, doing whatever they want at their own will to mold this city in their image. And then even other areas that are more alien, like the quarantine zone, where you get alien vegetation and life built on top of this stuff. Super impressive, super believable. Some of the alien stuff in particular, it must be like some graphics voodoo magic they're doing there, but it all looked incredible to me.
Oh, actually, that's a great point. How were the graphics overall? Did they look good? Because Half-Life has been known for like pushing the series forward typically. So does this kind of do the same?
I would say definitely push it forward again. I was just using an HTC Vive headset, so I guess technically it's going to look even better for those with an Index headset. And a funny story is that I was playing on my friend's computer, and this was a computer that was great for 2016. But when we went to check the settings to see, maybe there's some different graphics fiddling that we can do, it was only on low fidelity settings. I mean, I'm like, wow, this is already good enough. Or maybe if you have a newer computer from recently, it's gonna look that much better.
Now, one thing you mentioned to me before we started recording is that the level design stood out to you as just being, I think, really well built. Tell us a little bit more about that, and what was it about the level design that really stood out?
You were wondering about if it's going to be more limited to room by room basis. And I did have a slight worry about that in a couple of the early chapters being more underground and in confined areas. But I knew from the beginning scene of seeing the Citadel being built that there was going to be possible some giant set pieces and some more wide open areas. Definitely that did happen later on, and there were some moments even at the end that was kind of like going through a giant theme park ride, even though it was me traversing with the teleporter in VR. They did such a good job with some of it, and some of the level design, there was one in particular, kind of an apartment building with a giant hole kind of ripped through the center of it, and you kind of have to make your way up and down in it, and they do it in such a way that feels unique and fresh. Pretty impressed overall.
Do you think this game do you think it needed to be in VR? Could it have worked without it, or do you think for it to be what it is, it had to be in VR?
Yeah, that's a tough question. There's always solutions to every problem. I could take Mario 64 and make it in 2D. Well, I couldn't do it, but somebody could. It wouldn't be the same experience though. You'd miss out on a lot of key details, but you could have some of the heart there. In this game, you could have some of the enemy combat with mouse and keyboard controls. People would probably say, hey, this is great, this is Half-Life again. But it wouldn't be that evolution of the series that maybe Valve was looking for. Their heart was clearly in making a great VR game, and I feel stuff like dodging, peeking around corners, stuff like that adds a lot to it. So basically, like, you could make it if you really wanted to, but you'd be severely crippling the game experience.
So yeah, so you're saying you wouldn't want to play it without VR then?
So there were some sections that might work without VR, but there was definitely one chapter in particular where I wouldn't want to play it any other way without VR. It made me do motions with my hands that wouldn't be possible in the same type of sense of immersion with controller, and it even brought kind of hand management into play into what my priorities were at the time.
That's pretty interesting sounding. All right, yeah, that sounds like something you can only do really in VR. So I consider myself intrigued. How was the voice acting? I think you touched on it a little bit earlier, but one of the kind of more controversial issues, if you want to call it that, is that they recast Alyx Vance. How does she sound in this game? Any issues with her or the voice acting at all, or does she fit in perfectly?
Surprisingly, from the, amount of years that it's been since playing Half-Life 2, I didn't realize it was a different actor until I read afterwards that it was, and that is more so she sounds younger. This is definitely not let's make her sound like she's 14 younger. She sounded just like a regular mature adult, and I had no problems with it.
Well, that's great to hear. So, Tom, I think we've touched on pretty much all the major points, so I guess we should wrap this up. So on the Game Explain scale, what is your overall verdict?
I wrestled with my verdict a bit just because I was wondering if I should give it an even higher score. But in thinking about it, I settled with loved. It's really a game that I feel only comes around once every decade or so. It's going to be 20 or 30 when we're talking about our game of the decade discussions, and I know this game is going to be there on my list when it comes to that time.
Wow. That's some pretty high praise. Just to summarize, like, what is it about this game that stood out so much to you that made it one of the best games of the decade? Possibly. Very possibly.
Possibly. Very early on in the decade, but yeah. Possibly. I could feel how much work Valve put behind this game in crafting it, iterating, making it, the environment so beautiful and looked like they're lived in. The fact that the VR motion, they learned all these lessons that work so well, adding to the gameplay in terms of depth of what I could do, and just overall a story that I was more than satisfied with. I loved it overall.
Do you want Half-Life 3 to be in VR?
Oh man, I'm gonna say if they can figure out melee mechanics, because melee wasn't in this one, I would love Half-Life 3 in VR. I think definitely this is a step going forward, and even without melee, whatever they come up with, it's gonna be great. It's gonna be so immersive that, yeah, I'm all for Half-Life 3 in VR, and I'll be fully ready for it.
Alright, that sounds pretty exciting. So, sounds like I need to upgrade my VR headset from the Quest to something that can play Half-Life natively, because I really have to play Half-Life Alyx now. This sounds fantastic.
Works on Labo, doesn't it?
If only. Alright, so there you guys have it. It's our review discussion of Half-Life Alyx. It sounds like you definitely need to check this game out for yourself, whether you're a Half-Life or a VR fan, or especially both. Definitely check it out. I know I will be myself as soon as I can, once this quarantine's over, once I can escape our own City 17. So, on that note, thank you so much for watching, and make sure to click that subscribe button for tons more on Half-Life in the future and everything else gaming as well. We'll catch you later. Bye.